So Matt, I don't know how many minutes here we want to give folks, but maybe just give me a thumbs up when you want to get started.
Sure. Yeah. So thanks to everyone, and welcome for everyone who's joining us for this conference on social and ecological infrastructure for recidivism reduction. We will get started in just about a minute. So welcome, and thanks for joining us.
All right. Well, good afternoon, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. My name is Matt Vines. I work with the Urban Resources Initiative within Yale's School of the Environment. As a quick overview, today's session is going to consist of two different panels. Each group of panelists will share for roughly 50 minutes. And then we're going to open it up for about 5 to 10 minutes of audience Q&A. So as Jeff has so kindly posted in the chat, we encourage you at any point during the discussions to post any questions or comments you have. But when we open it up for Q&A, we also encourage you to ask your question directly, time permitting. Today's panels are a continuation of the social and ecological infrastructure for recidivism reduction virtual conference series, which began at the end of last week and will continue with weekly events through April 20th. The conference is co-convened by Boston College and Yale School of the Environment and supported by a grant from the National Science Foundation. And I'm lucky enough to be joined today by Matt Del Sesto from Boston College, who is the co-organizer and co-host of this conference. So Matt, thank you so much for all of your hard work to make today's session and the conference as a whole a possibility. So without further ado, my pleasure to introduce our first set of panelists. I'm just going to give a very brief introduction in the interest of time, but Anna will be posting a link to, or Matt just posted a link to our conference program, which includes more detailed bios for all of the speakers if you'd like to learn more. So first we have Dr. Morgan Grove, who is a social scientist and team leader for the USDA Forest Service's Baltimore Urban Field Station and a lecturer at Yale University. Dr. Grove is joined by Jeff Carroll, co-founder and principal at Urban Wood Economy, and Steve Freeman, vendor resource manager at Room and Board Inc. And Morgan, Jeff, and Steve will be sharing about the Baltimore Urban Wood Project. So gentlemen, I turn it over to you. Thank you all so much for being here.
Thank you. We're going to get started now. Can you see can you see the slides? Can someone give me I got a head nod going once. Well, it's our pleasure to be with you today and to share with you the work that we began in Baltimore and have now expanded throughout the country. One of the really exciting aspects of this is that it is starting with the need to engage socially, economically, and environmentally and culturally in the city of Baltimore, and to build systems that work together to try to address some of the long-term histories of institutionalized racism in the city of Baltimore. It's also, we think, a model for things that we could be doing throughout the country. And we will love to hear from you and answer your questions that you might have about this project. It's also exciting because it's a partnership between public agencies, nonprofit organizations, and the private sector. And we really need all three legs of that stool to work together effectively in order to address these problems. A little bit of background on why the Forest Service is involved in this. If you go back to the early 1900s, the Forest Service really started out as a land reclamation organization. We had forests throughout the East that had been clear cut, and with that clear cutting, there was a loss of wildlife. There was a pollution of streams and lakes because of soil erosion, and the massive loss of economy to the communities who had depended upon those forests, both for employment, but also depended upon the wildlife for food. We now turn to the future and, well, to the near past of 2018, and we face similar challenges. And we'll discuss a little bit more about the amount of wood that we have in our cities, but also that we have communities that depend upon restoration economically and socially to really look forward to the future. And so we bring together that social and environmental mission with a land reclamation and a community revitalization mentality. We have here, purposefully so, this phrase that waste is a verb, not a noun. And why we say that is that because it signals that there's a choice, that we've made a choice to waste things. And in the case of when we think about wood, we know that in the United States, we have about 7.2 billion board feet of wood in our urban areas, and that's worth an estimate of $89 to $786 million. We also know that in terms of the wood flows that we have more wood coming out of urban areas and going into landfills than is actually harvested from our national forests, which signifies not only the amount, but comparatively that it is a amount even larger than what we have coming out of some of our rural areas. In Baltimore, we have a concentration of problems that are the result of institutionalized racism in the city of Baltimore, similar to what we have in many cities throughout the United States. This is a concentration that Lawrence Brown refers to as the black butterfly, meaning the two wings of the butterfly on East and West Baltimore. And what we have is very high levels of vacancy rates, very low owner-occupied housing units, high levels of crime associated because of the racism that we have associated with where we have African-American households, and also with the unemployment rates, people who live below the poverty line, in a low area of the amount of trees. So we have a concentration of environmental, social, and economic challenges to face. And this is what the city looks like in some of these neighborhoods. And it can be almost like something that you would have from the Twilight Zone, where you'll have entire blocks and all the homes are boarded up. And this is another picture. And this isn't a picture of 1917. This is a picture from 2018. So one of our challenges in kicking off this project has been, how do we bring things together and to address this concentration, which is also associated with a long history of recidivism, well, incarceration and recidivism, to what we call the Baltimore Wood Project and rethinking wood in the city. And basically the idea that we have old wood that we can use. So it's a systems approach where we want to go from waste to wealth, and that we want to be active in it. treating it as though it's a verb. And we have two sources of wood, one of which is the trees that are part of the street tree programs that you have in your cities and in your park areas and in your residential areas. You also have homes that are being taken down. And rather than demolish them, we seek to deconstruct them. We then want to avoid taking them to the landfill. What we want to do is take it to a facility where those materials can be sorted and processed, and then they can be made into new things, and that can then go back into homes that can be used to establish parks and can create economies for people who have historically had barriers to employment. The system sort of looks like this. We have the strategic aspects of count, salvage, and sort. We have the opportunistic aspects of generate, process, produce, and consume. And we'll talk about each of these briefly. One of the key things about understanding this is the distinction between strategic and opportunistic. The opportunistic are the things that are happening in the city now. It is the generation of the wood materials, often now treated as waste. Some of that material is used and it's processed, it's made into things, and it appears often in a boutique way and in conference rooms and in countertops and flooring. And to really unleash the economic and social and environmental opportunities, we need to address the strategic aspects so that we maximize the value that we seek to have. The first part is the count. We need to know what we have. Businesses are risk averse. And if we don't know what we have in terms of the wood material that's available, both in terms of fresh cut and in the buildings, it's unlikely that we'll have these businesses starting to emerge. One of the ways that we've done this is to support something called the Urban Forest Inventory Analysis, which gives you an idea of how much wood is out there. It can be coupled with street tree inventories, and it can be coupled with departments of housing and their knowledge about what materials they have in their reservoir of homes that either need to be demolished or deconstructed. First, the bottom line is that you have to have an inventory of what you have and ideally what the condition of those materials are. And with this, I'm going to turn it over to you, Jeff.
Yeah, so I think when we looked at this challenge around urban wood, our initial take on it was through the lens of an employment opportunity for the people who were living in those butterfly neighborhoods. And so when Morgan and I first met around this topic of the creation of an urban wood economy and marketplace, I was looking at it primarily from a workforce development objective, and through that lens, we recognized as an organization, and I was part of an organization called Humanum at that time, who had a big emphasis on workforce development and had a long history of working with people with disabilities, developmental disabilities, behavioral challenges. But when they came to Baltimore City, they had been one of the suburban counties has been their home. And when they moved into Baltimore City, they wanted to work with the folks who were in these butterfly communities where there was super high unemployment and lots of challenges and barriers to them ever being employed. But there's a challenge that comes when, first of all, when you change populations that you're used to serving, but also in particular in this situation, Baltimore was already known for a city that was providing lots and lots of trainings. There was lots of workforce development opportunities to pick up a new skill or a new certification. What was missing, though, was the job at the end of that training process. And so we were finding individuals who were going through 3, 4, and even 5 different workforce development programs still unemployed. So we said, what if we took a look at this challenge around urban waste, wood waste in particular, and because of the buildings that were coming down in Baltimore, there was also a high percentage of brick waste. We said, what if we could take those buildings down, capture the commodities in that waste stream? If we could extract it efficiently, we might be able to put people to work in a sustainable fashion. And so that's what we focused on. And when Morgan and I met, I was working hard on this workforce development side, and he was tasked with trying to figure out how to grow and strengthen the ecosystem that would be fertile ground for the development of an urban wood economy. So we kept working on that, and we found that there definitely was an opportunity, because if we deconstructed the buildings that were coming down in Baltimore City instead of straight demo, we could create 6 to 8 times more jobs and harvest all that wood rather than sending it directly to a landfill where it would rot, release the carbon that had been captured and sequestered in that material right back into the atmosphere, or it would go to the incinerator. Same thing would happen. But the benefits of those trees that were, hundreds of years old and then 100 years after being milled, of their ability to sequester carbon was going to be lost as soon as that material was harvested out of those buildings. If we could turn them into durable goods, we'd sequester that, right? And we'd keep it captured for the foreseeable future. So we looked at how we could strengthen each other's hand in this thing, address the urban wood from an economy standpoint, and also make it a stronger employment vehicle. And so ultimately, our team went to the city of Baltimore and said, hey, if you'll consider opening up another contracting vehicle for doing deconstruction, we'll show that it can be done competitively and that the economic benefits you receive as a city will more than offset any mild premium you might pay to have those services done. And we took about 18 to 20 months to vet that process. Came back with a pitch to the city. They agreed to put out a competitive solicitation, and we won that, and began this process of capturing wood from buildings. And sure enough, we were able this slide shows 165 people that we employed over that period of time. When we finally reached the end of our contract with the city, which is currently suspended due to COVID, it went up to 200, just over 200 people that we were able to employ. And almost all of them came from those butterfly neighborhoods. So these were folks that were justice involved, had spent time incarcerated. Many of them had grown up in communities that had poor access to good education or training opportunities. And because of this disenfranchisement that those communities experience, they were also cut off from many of the networks that allow individuals to get into jobs. So our whole goal was, if we could reach into those communities and just create the initial on-ramp to the employment highway, that as they got out and started working in industry, then those connections could get made, they would acquire the skills they needed, and any previous incarceration record would be overshadowed by a very current work record, many of them working with us for more than 2 years. So it showed some longevity, some stick, and they did indeed acquire skills over that period of time. Not everybody was a success story, but we did have a lot of people who benefited from this pathway out and were able to, with their partner in life, buy a home, get secure housing, put their kids in school, help them go to college. We started to see this sort of multi-generational impact. And that's what got very, very exciting about it. And that story became very powerful for people who wanted the product, because as much as you had people who were becoming very environmentally conscious and wanted to utilize reclaimed materials in their product lines, they were also passionate about the social impact that was accompanying this kind of effort, that it was not just sequestering carbon or minimizing the impact on our landfills, which in Maryland have a moratorium, but it was having an honest impact on individuals' lives. It was actually moving the needle in both individually and then in pockets of the city where more concentrated efforts around hiring and employment were taking place. So it became very, very powerful. It started out pretty small. The very first year we were in existence, might have did $500,000. When we finally came to the end of this run, municipal contracts, the Details Deconstruction, along with its sister company, Brick and Board, grew up to about $5 million operation. Again, hiring over that period of time, a couple of hundred people, and having on staff 25 to 35 at any given time. And it had an honest impact in individuals' lives, but also in becoming an initial kind of cornerstone in the development of this urban wood economy that was necessary to sustain any of these environmental or social initiatives.
Maybe, Jeff, just let me add, when we were contacted by the Forest Service back in 2018 about this project that you and Morgan were working on, obviously Room and Board gets contacted by people with supply of materials all the time. Many of those are reclaimed materials. A lot of people, as you probably know, do a lot of reclaimed materials from old factories, old barns, all kinds of old buildings all across this country. And that material is readily available to really anyone. I think the biggest advantage that we saw in the Baltimore project was the benefits that we could provide by doing something that included the social enterprise aspect of it. If it wouldn't have been for the social enterprise aspect, I doubt we would have gotten involved, just because of the logistics of doing something from Baltimore into our manufacturers would have been pretty daunting no matter what. But when you learn the story, when you learn what they're doing, when you learn the impact that they're having, and how the city of Baltimore has also embraced it, it just felt like somebody's got to step in and help this continue. Without the private piece, without the social piece, without the Forest Service, as Morgan said at the beginning, it just doesn't happen. And it took the right partners at the right time in the right place to make all of this function in a way that actually had benefit to a lot of people.
And I'm going to add something to that, Steve, because I think what also happened, there was, I'd been, in this space for a while and working with Morgan for a while in the space. But when we hit that point where Room and Board entered the collaboration, became part of this larger circle of stakeholders, between Room and Board and the Forest Service, the entire project garnered a level of cachet that gave it a lot of credibility in other cities, and even helped in Baltimore. So much so that it inspired us to go beyond looking at just what was coming out of buildings and really take a look at the material that was coming down in the form of trees in the city. And that's a number that continues to grow across the country. I think now, Morgan, we probably should update our slides here, but I think that's, approaching 17.5 million tons, of wood waste, according to Mike Galvin's most recent work. And it's just an amazing amount of material that has the potential to generate revenue. And we really, from my perspective, I was initially very, very happy to just see us create jobs in Baltimore and these disenfranchised neighborhoods. But once Room and Board entered, and I realized, oh, wow, there's a whole nother level of market out here that could sustain the social impact across the country.
Mm-hmm.
For me personally, it sort of reinvigorated my own imagination about what might be, what could be. And then in partnership with Forest Service, Room and Board, and then other players who, kind of subsequently got interested, we now have initiatives going on in Philadelphia, St. Louis, in the San Diego area. And those are just the ones that I'm personally involved with. There's certainly deep interest in about 30 cities across the country.
I was going to say, based on our mutual work together, we've done things with the Forest Service where we've had these urban wood network events where we brought people from other communities to try to learn what was going on. We even been engaged with the Arbor Day Foundation and a couple of events, doing events like this to get the word out. And since our working with Baltimore, we also work with other cities that have maybe not as robust of programs as what's happening in Baltimore, but we're doing some, but they all have like a social enterprise piece to them. So we're working in Detroit, we're working with Wood from the Hood in Minneapolis, we're working with Sacramento Tree Foundation. And all of these are dealing with urban wood as well as working with people with barriers to employment. And it's just become kind of a mini movement in a way to try to
Yeah.
how do we get more of this wood from going into the waste stream.
Absolutely. And I think that it's the partnership that makes the different people who may have sort of a Popeye mentality of I am what I am, but when we all come together, it really magnifies our ability to have an effect and to draw attention and to help cities realize that this is possible. And it's what's exciting too is how this whole process leads to those beautiful things, which is evident in what Room and Board does and Taylor Guitar, but also that people have jobs and that they can own a home and that they get control over their lives. It starts to play out as we move from here where we have the material to our salvage yards. This is Camp Small in Baltimore. It's referred to Camp Small not as a comment on size, but because apparently there was a Captain Small and it was a Civil War camp. And this is where the wood comes in Baltimore for all the street trees that come down. It has to be sorted. And this was one of the things that you really saw people starting to get good at, which is how to manage the material, whether it's the material that Max Pollock is taking out of the deconstructed homes, how to manage the brick, or how to handle the street trees. And then it has to get processed. And it's kind of fun to see machines that were built in the 1940s and 1950s still having a life and being heavy duty to process this material. Here's what you're seeing of old growth yellow pine that, as Jeff said, when it was cut down, it was maybe 300 to 400 years old, and then it sat in a home for 100 years. And then it leads us to these materials that we start to have. This is examples from Brick and Board. I think that Jeff was commenting that we need to update these slides. Here we say that they've salvaged 700,000 bricks. I think they're well over 1 million bricks.
About 1.5 million bricks. And they are now doing probably 250,000 board feet annually is where they're up to now. But I would say that they're well over 1 million since the inception of the enterprise 4 years ago.
Right. We had the mayor of St. Louis come and visit with some of the leading business people from St. Louis. And there was a time when during the tour we had with them, it was like the scene out of the boat on Jaws where, everyone's trying to brag about who has a bigger scar. But in our case, the sad piece was, who had the most murders in their city. But then there was also the who had the best bricks as well. And I think that what you start to see, as leadership in cities, when they stop thinking about waste as a noun, but as a verb, and they start to realize that there's a huge amount of wealth that is escaping them, as well as the huge amounts of costs of people being in a situation where they've chosen to do crimes, the cost of incarceration, that you start to say, there's got to be a different way. There's got to be a better way. And that starts to play out in this whole system that comes together. And Steve, I'd like to turn to you, if you don't mind, to talk a little bit about the products that you all have developed, not limited to Baltimore, that and sort of where you see things going in terms of using urban wood within Room and Board, but perhaps even more broadly.
When we started with Baltimore, we really were just using the reclaimed material out of the Baltimore row homes. And those of you that know Room and Board, I know many of you probably have never heard of us, but that's fine. We're a modern, contemporary home furnishings retailer with stores across the country. So for us to do something purely reclaimed is not necessarily fit for our customers, but our customers do like to see, what's behind the wood. They like to celebrate the wood. And when we can speak to them about the sustainability of it, we can speak to them about the history of it. And we can also speak to them about the process of getting this wood, using social enterprise, helping a community get themselves back on their feet. Just makes it something we can do. So you can see, obviously the guitar is from Taylor Guitars. That's not something we do. But the piece down at the bottom is one of our collections where it's made with wood that's new wood for the outside of the cabinet. And then the drawers and doors are made from the reclaimed yellow pine that comes out of the Baltimore row homes. And as Jeff noted, all of that wood is processed from brick and board out of the Baltimore row homes and then sent to our manufacturer in Pennsylvania to manufacture the piece that gets distributed across the country. We also have other pieces that are from Baltimore product. But what we're also finding is that there's not only a home for the reclaimed material out of Baltimore, but there's also homes for some of the urban wood that we're actually generating product from now. It's kind of new wood that's made into wood that can be used. So we've got things now out of communities such as products like sycamore, redwood, other pieces that really highlight the wood that's in urban cities.
Thanks, Steve. And Steve mentioned Taylor Guitar. Taylor Guitar does, this number always blows my mind. Taylor Guitar does 800 handmade guitars a day. And one of the things that they've shifted to is using ash that's available to them in Southern California. And they now have an urban ash guitar. And they're looking to increase the amount of wood that they use from urban areas. And one of the things that we saw emerge from Taylor Guitar and Room and Board is thinking about a full life cycle approach to trees. And how we plant trees, we take care of trees, but as Bob Taylor says, you can never go wrong investing in the inevitable, which is that a tree will die and that wood ideally can be used in ways. And so we see Taylor Guitar using this. The top right-hand picture is the Exelon headquarters in Baltimore, which used the yellow pine in the entry to the multi-story building and using it in the wall paneling. Once the buildings go, we then need to look at what can come next. And here, this is an example of Eager Street, what it looked like in 1925 with all of these row homes. This was workers' housing. And these homes would have been built within like the past 10 or 15 years. They would have been built somewhere between 1905 and what you see in 1925. Many of those homes had to be taken down under a contract with Details. This entire block was removed and it was deconstructed. It wasn't demolished. And you see in the lower left-hand corner Details operations, and then you see this new park that was constructed. And Steve, I mean, Jeff, I don't know if you might want to comment on working with Ms. Hudson and sort of the transformation and how the community reacted to seeing these homes being taken down and the park being built.
Yeah, happy to. I think that whenever we look at projects like this, we'd love to have good hard data, and we want to be able to measure the actual impact and effectiveness. There were some of the measures and feedback that were hard to quantify, but were very, very real in terms of social impact on the communities in which we worked. In Baltimore, like many old urban centers, you have what we affectionately refer to as the local mayor, the community organizer, the person that everybody else in that particular neighborhood looks to for leadership. In this particular neighborhood near Eager Street, which ended up having lots of names, but one of them was Station East, and we'll refer to it as that. They looked for her to give, to say this is a good thing or a bad thing that we're coming in and taking down these buildings. And as I sat down and talked with her before the project started, and listened to the journey that neighborhood had been on and how it had socially sort of come apart, losing any sense of community fabric, the the drug industry had sort of taken over. The dealers were dominating the place, and there were so many places for them to hide and to carry out industry because there were so many vacant buildings. When we started working there, there were 60% of the buildings in that neighborhood were vacant. We took down 60 houses in that block by deconstruction, salvaged 200,000 bricks out of that one neighborhood, and about 50 to 60,000 board feet of lumber. But the amazing thing, we employed people from the neighborhood. That became permanent employees of Details. This was our first major, big project. And the relationship that we built with them and the way it encouraged and sort of brought, and I'm not using that in a trite manner. I mean, it really was a hopeful thing for that neighborhood. And it had an impact on how that neighborhood received new people coming in, because once we sort of weeded out the blight, people and developers bought up the structurally sound vacant houses, rehabbed them. And by the end of about a 2-year period from when we finished that to when the developers had come to work, we went from a 60% vacancy rate to 7%, which is sort of a critical number. Once you crest that and start dropping, it all fills in pretty fast. So the hopefulness of that project and the fact that where you see these trees or right-hand corner, that's about 2 acres of land that are now an urban park/forest where a couple hundred trees were planted in there. And it's become a community gathering place, and the health and I want to say just the liveliness of that community have been transformative. And so when we look at that project, we didn't have really anything to do with turning that park into a treed area, except we got rid of those houses that were in the way. And we did it in a way that it inspired the community to be excited about those houses coming down and not to see it as the death of their community. So it was an interesting project. It became the foundation for everything we did for the next 6 years in the city of Baltimore.
And I'd like to make a point here, which is that I think that through this process, Jeff and Steve, we've taken a larger view that's more than just jobs.
Yes.
Right? It's about reusing these materials. It is about the jobs and addressing lives and livelihoods, building these jobs and businesses and markets. But it's also, addressing the neighborhoods in which people live and the sort of social contexts that may either facilitate crime occurring or diminish crime occurring.
Mhm.
And I think that it's bigger than that person. It's about their family, that household, and the neighborhood that they live in. And so I think that has been a part of this transformational change. And we say economies, but it's really larger than this. While at the same time, you can't underestimate the value of just having a job.
Mhm. I was going to say, I mean, the one thing that none of us can really share in a way that's as meaningful as it would be if we could have a few of those workers who've been impacted by this sitting here talking to you. I've been fortunate enough to have had conversations with some of them, and they'll tell you that if it wasn't for this, they would probably still be in drugs. They might be back in jail. They'd probably be, still part of gang going on. And now because of this, there's people who have been able to get back into their children's lives, have been able to provide better shelter and homes for them, have been able to pay for their kids to go to school. And none of that would have happened if it wasn't for the program to do something with this material, do something with these buildings, do something with the urban wood. And it's hard for us to really convey that in a way that the people who actually live it could tell you.
Yep.
I agree. In the lower right-hand corner, the photo of the 3 individuals, the person to the left in the blue hoodie is Bernadette. She had applied to 32 different employers and was always turned down. She had a double incarceration record for drug sales and use, and she knew she had to keep working. She had hit that place in her life where she was done, but now she's living with some of the consequences and the barriers that have been created for individuals who have been incarcerated. And even after they've done their time and they come out and they're ready to return to society, they continue to be penalized. And so we hired her, and she quickly rose to be one of our top performers. And when we came to the end of the contract with the city, she was our #1 employee over a 6-year run. And when she was getting ready to make a move, another department in the organization we were with, Humanum, hired her to be a facilities director. She's just a fantastic employee and just an amazing person. But unless there are initiatives similar to this that are designed to have a component of their existence be around employment, and unless there's this larger collaborative investment by players like Room and Board and Forest Service, and there are others, it just can't happen. You have to have the whole thing going at once. You have to have the workforce development in, you have to have the market strengthened, the supply chain needs to be in place. All these things need to happen simultaneously, or it ultimately falls down. And I was looking at some of the questions that were being raised already in the chat, and I've been interacting a little bit, but it certainly is, those things are real, but part of it is because we have incomplete solutions. You really need to have a lot of things in place all at once. We were fortunate to have such strong players jump into this space with us and make that happen.
Great. I think we want to get to taking some questions. This is an example of some of the beautiful things that Room and Board has been doing, and I just can't say enough things about
Gorgeous.
corporate America when they do beautiful things and they do it in a beautiful way, like Room and Board.
Yeah.
And I think that we need corporate America paying attention and being part of the solution to all of this. And we also need to figure out the ways to pay for it. We've been working with Quantified Ventures in terms of impact investment. So we do need the business schools in helping us to figure out and to attract financing to this. And then we need to think about how we're going to take it to the rest of the country. This is the map of Southwest back when they were flying everywhere. But we need to figure out not only how to scale it in individual cities, but we need to figure out how to scale it in multiple cities and to scale it nationwide. And so I think that's one of our challenges. And as an organization or as a partnership, we want to share. We don't want to keep this to ourselves and be able to work with many other people who are out there. And with that, why don't we stop and take questions that people have. David, do you want to ask your question out? Daniel, do you want to ask your question out loud? Or just by text?
Daniel's got me on the hook to follow up with him on this. We are doing some work in the Pacific Northwest, especially in Portland and in King County in Washington State. But we're kind of early in those discussions, but there's a tremendous amount of interest. Portland has got one of the most progressive regulatory positions in the private industry. And so I suspect we're going to be out your way, Daniel, before too terribly long.
Bring it on. I look forward to meeting you, and you got a place to stay if you need one. I had another question, and I had texted you about it or chatted you about it, but do you provide a comprehensive support system for those working for you? One thing I know is years ago, I was interviewing people at Battery Park City, and they were using people from Rikers trained in an admirable green program. But the problem was they were so overwhelmed with coming out and what they were facing that their job consistency became, frankly, a challenge. And many of them weren't able to sustain the employment. So I was wondering how comprehensive and sort of where you get those support services for those you are working with.
Yeah, I was fortunate in that we were part of an organization, Humanum, that had a workforce development arm. Now, we still had to provide the resources to utilize those people to give those wraparound services as needed. But they were there and they were available, and we were able to access them. And as we got some additional grant funding, we were also able to bring on part-time social workers, to help with some of the barrier removal. We also got kind of good at it ourselves, because we were set up from the beginning to be employers for people with barriers to employment. We all had a bit of a mindset already, and it was part of what I looked for in people that were added to the team. They're already committed to this kind of work. So even our field experts were also had a little bit of social worker in them, and so we were constantly thinking about how to even write company policy in a way that made it possible for individuals to transition. We also partnered with other local agencies who did reentry programs that helped individuals move from incarceration back into free society, but had a bit of a transition period in between to sort of get that mental adjustment so that they were not thrown into the deep end of the pool and have it be very cold water. So I think those were some of the things that helped us be successful. We were much better at the end than we were at the beginning. I will say that.
I'll add too, because I think it's worth noting that one of the great things about getting involved in the construction trades is that there's a sort of low barrier to entry, that you can teach the skills
On the job.
on the job. It doesn't, and people can develop their skills and education as they go. And it's also, the construction industry is extremely short on skilled labor. And so that there is other companies that would want to be able to hire these people. And I think one of the challenges that Jeff faced was that people actually really liked working for him. I know that may be a surprise, but they really liked working for him. So the idea is that people would work in details and brick and forward for maybe 2 or 3 years, and then they would go on. But they didn't really want to, because they actually really liked working for details and brick and board. And so that's something to kind of figure out is, it was a really good place to bring people initially in, and that you knew that there was a large demand for employees who would have these kinds of skills, and how do you encourage them to continue to want to progress from a place where they may be feeling pretty good.
Morgan, I'd like to pick up another quick question here. That the question is, do we have problems with unions, and are we taking this to other places? Are we going to New York City? One of the companies that I work with now is called Cambium Carbon, who is actually the founder and president is a Yale grad, Ben Christensen, and I think Marissa Repka is also from Yale, along with some people from other universities. But this really came out of the School of Management and Sustainability, and they developed a company that's addressing the carbon issues that cities are facing, and we're working together to a holistic look. But they're doing a fabulous job of reaching out into other cities and helping develop the market for the wood, because if you can't sell this stuff, everything else falls down. And one of the cities that we are working in right now is New York City. So I don't know how that's going to pan out just yet. It's early, but we are beginning to reach up into New York, and you want to keep your eye and ear open for carbon. They're going to be a player in this space. As far as unions go, no real problems with unions.
Right. So there's a question about gentrification. You know, when I work with the current director of planning for Baltimore City, he kind of made a point. You have two ways to do affordable housing. You can make housing that's really inexpensive and not very well made, or you can work to create employment at a livable wage, and people can be able to buy the homes that they want. And I think that this kind of skews to trying to create the employment where people can afford the homes that they would like. I think that, well, and here I'm going to speak from the perspective of Baltimore. If I wanted to gentrify Baltimore, I would fix the public school system. I don't think that this process is going to lead to a whole lot of gentrification. What Jeff was talking about over at Station East involved maybe a slight escalation and increase in people's homes, but the main thing was that you were finally getting investment. We had failed real estate markets, and you started to get the investment that's occurring. But I'm not quite sure that Ms. Hudson and others there would feel as though their neighborhood has been gentrified.
Yeah, there's a much bigger conversation here because the city of Baltimore has an initiative that, like, if we come in, if you own one of those houses that we were deconstructing and it was in disrepair, it at best might have been worth a couple $1,000s, quite literally. If we went in to take that down, the city would purchase that house from you at a fair market price, and then they would buy you another house to move into, and those folks chose to stay in their neighborhood. So there was immediate transfer of wealth to individuals so that they could stay in their neighborhood, and it did not force gentrification of the neighborhood. People could stay. And interestingly enough, once the developers came in and started to rehab or build out some of the others, the other spaces, then they would attract people who wanted to be in an integrated neighborhood. So I think it worked out incredibly well. You'd have to talk to the people who live there to see how they feel about it. But from my standpoint, what I saw was something that did not result in gentrification, but instead it resulted in the people who lived in those communities gaining equity, collateral value, and the price of their houses escalating dramatically. They owned houses that were on the edge of, worthless now. A market rate house in their neighborhood sells for $260,000, $70,000. It's a tremendous boost. So,
Erica asked two questions, and so when we do the field tours and we have the Urban Wood Academy in Baltimore, we do try to engage with the employees to talk and share their experiences. Sometimes they can be shy, so we have Damon Truelove who is happy to share what's going on. But yes, we do try to engage them in these activities in a way, in a context that they're comfortable with. And maybe Jeff, you could offer some more on that.
Yeah, I can offer a lot more on it. Actually, I just think that it's easy for me as an old white man to talk about how no gentrification isn't happening, or this is not having a negative impact on neighborhoods, or because I see through a certain lens. And even though I would say that my optics have matured and grown and are much more inclusive than they've ever been, you still need to hear from the Damons and the Bernadettes and those folks that actually live in the neighborhoods and have worked in this industry and get their take on it.
Yeah. Jeff, when people are looking to go to that next level, what sort of support did Details and Brick and Board offer?
Well, I wish I had been around for me when I started this. I just feel like I've learned so much through the process now, and I'm happy to be working alongside other cities and other players who want to develop these things. You need the relationship with municipalities. You need the relationship with organizations like the Forest Service that bring so much cachet and research and relationship and network to the table. You need the relationship with these mid-level companies like Room and Board, who have the ability, to purchase and to give credibility to what it is you're going after. So I mean, there's so many factors here, but at the heart of this whole thing is really an understanding that this does not work without a collaborative approach. Understanding that there are multiple, one of these kinds of solutions around capturing urban wood and turning it back into a saleable product is a solution that addresses more than one problem, and you really need to touch the entire ecosystem that's benefiting from this sort of an endeavor, and see if you can identify revenue streams that come from those recipients. So whether it's selling product and creating a revenue stream there, or it's getting grant dollars, or it's getting contracts, or getting regulatory assistance, any of those things all can make the difference between these kinds of initiatives succeeding or failing.
Daniel asked about getting involved in the construction trades, and actually, if I'm inferring correctly, Daniel actually starting to build stuff. I think that in the case of Humanum, the head of Humanum, his brother was head of, was it Chesapeake Bay Habitat for Humanity, Chesapeake?
Yeah. Yeah.
So there was always that kind of proposition. I think that one of the challenges, if you get overextended, then you also risk losing the whole business. And so maybe I think our inclination would be, can we create a partnership to do that rather than trying to expand a business to do that? And I don't know, Jeff and Steve, if you have thoughts on that.
I was going to say, we've looked at how much reclaimed material we can work with within our kind of scope. And it's a limited amount of the reclaimed material. There's probably a bigger opportunity for true fresh cut out of urban areas where we're actually taking down trees, generating dimensional lumber, and using it as if it's a traditional source of material. That has much bigger potential in our world. And Jeff and I have had this conversation too, and it's like we have to just be balanced, because we can't just take everything out of urban wood. We'll just create another problem for the harvested lumber industry as well. So where's that balance? The supply chain on the urban wood side is really fragmented right now. It's not very developed, creates higher prices for the material. Actually, right now, with the prices of lumber going up as much as they are, where urban wood might be a good source of supply.
Yeah.
Because there might not be as big of a difference in the material cost. But there's just lots of, I don't want to call them barriers. There's just lots of stumbles along the way that we've got to work through to get there. And I think from 2018 till now, probably the biggest advantage we have is the community of people talking about it is growing, and everybody seems to want to get to the same conclusion at the end of the day, is to use more of this urban wood in a meaningful way versus just putting it in the landfills. So there's a common goal. And because of that, I think there's really an opportunity here to do something that makes it easier for those that follow than maybe what Jeff has dealt with, Forest Service, we've dealt with. And that's when it'll work. When it becomes a more commonplace supply chain, it'll work. Right now, it is a little challenging.
Yeah. And I'll add to the supply chain point, which is ideally it retains its social mission.
Right.
That we want to play a catalytic and transformative role. And I think that's kind of the gut check when trying to reach out and to build partnerships, is that they have, among everything else, that social and individual mission to make people's lives better.
Great, thanks, Morgan. I think this is Matt. I think this is a good stopping place for us. Thank you so much to everyone that submitted questions. Really enjoyed this thoughtful conversation. Morgan, Jeff, Steve, of course, thank you to all of you. I've had the pleasure of visiting a lot of the Baltimore Urban Wood facilities and am always really, really excited to hear more about this project and the fantastic work you all are doing. So thank you. If any of our participants have any questions that you didn't have a chance to ask or anything comes up in the future, Anna did post a link to a Google Doc in the chat for connecting with our panelists after the event. So I encourage you to check that out. And we are going to break now for 15 minutes and we will come back at 4:15 and start with our second panel. So we'll see you all back here then. To those that are just joining us, welcome. Thank you for being here. Today's program is a continuation of the Social and Ecological Infrastructure for Recidivism Reduction virtual conference series. There will be events weekly running from now through April 20th. So we encourage you to attend as many of those as you're available for and would like. We are going to jump right into our second panel. This panel is going to explore the use of healing gardens and other therapeutic landscapes in correctional settings, and the ways that these spaces can be created and maintained effectively and safely, while also providing significant benefits for incarcerated individuals and for prison staff as well. For this discussion, we're lucky enough to be joined by Julie Stevens, who is an associate professor in the Department of Landscape Architecture at Iowa State University, and Patty Walkendorf, who is a former warden of the Iowa State Penitentiary. Patty and Julie, I'll turn it over to the two of you now. Thank you both so much for being here.
Thanks, Matt. So Patty is actually the former warden of the Iowa Correctional Institution for Women, and then the former warden at the Iowa State Penitentiary. So she's got some perspective on a couple of different projects that we'll talk about today. You know, when I titled this abstract, you know, I kind of defaulted to this unlikely partnership, but now I've been listening to so many presentations from this conference, and it's not unlikely in the, you know, in the work that so many of us are doing, which is great to see that there are so many programs out there, and many that I knew of and many that I didn't. But we're going to talk a little bit about what we've done in the landscape at the Iowa Correctional Institution for Women primarily, and also at the Iowa State Penitentiary.
I mean, I understand that.
I just want to start. There we go.
So that notion.
There we go. I want to start with an acknowledgement that Iowa State University is on the ancestral lands of the Iowa Nation, and that our land was obtained from the Meskwaki and Sauk tribes in the Treaty of 1842. I also want to just take a second and acknowledge that even though we're talking primarily about the Iowa Correctional Institution for Women, there are a handful of incarcerated individuals at the ICIW who do not associate or identify as women. And so primarily the language that we use is incarcerated individuals, but I recognize that every institution sort of uses different terminology. So I just want to start with a little story about an incarcerated individual that I worked with at ICIW who was really enjoying the work that we were doing in the gardens. And one day we went in and I could tell that she was having a hard time. And she just said, can we go work somewhere else, because there's somebody really trying to get under my skin. And the old me, I would have just beat him up, but I don't want to lose my spot in this garden. The garden makes me calm. I really love it here. And so I said, sure, well, let's go work in the garden behind Nines, so that, we're kind of out of sight, out of mind. And you can use that space as a place to, just calm down and we'll hang out. And that was the way that day went. I didn't realize that this particular individual had a long history of negative interactions inside the facility. And I know that gardens can be therapeutic. There's all kinds of research that suggests that spending time in nature is indeed therapeutic and provides a lot of benefits. I know Naomi Sachs and Amy Wagenfeld and Daniel Winterbottom talked a bit about some of these theories on Saturday. And so you've got, if you were listening to that, you've gotten some grounding and some evidence-based theories. And we'll talk a little bit more about them, but I'm not going to go into great detail. But I know that nature is therapeutic because I feel it myself. I see it in my kids. I've seen it in my students. I see it in people I interact with. We seek out natural spaces to calm ourselves, to be overwhelmed by nature, and instead of this crazy world that we live in. But then when I was faced with this interaction where there's somebody saying to me, I'm about to make a bad decision, but I'm not going to because of a garden, I really started to think a little bit more deeply about just how powerful our relationship is with nature and natural spaces and tending to gardens and plants and other living things. So I'll just give you a very brief overview. This is the Iowa Correctional Institution for Women. And I just realized we didn't really introduce ourselves, but I guess Matt did. I don't know, Patty, if you want to say anything else, but I'll kind of jump in here and explain the site. And then Patty, if you want to introduce yourself, you can certainly do that. So Patty and I got together because the Iowa Correctional Institution for Women had been granted some money from the state to build new facilities. They were in a former girls' reform school. It was old and dilapidated and needed to be updated. So this is the campus master plan, and this is one of the earlier master plans that students came up with to really maximize the 80 or 90 acres that the prison sits on. There's about 32 within the secure perimeter, which you see in this black line here. And really the students approached this design the way they would approach any sort of campus, which was to look at native plant communities. So they were building out based on the topography and the slope aspect. They're really thinking about plants that fit into these communities and layering in other things like therapeutic garden theories and biophilic theories and attention restoration and those kinds of things that we'll talk about. And then also layering in vegetable production, layering in recreation, layering in spaces to create community and relationships. And so we end up with this master plan that looks rather complicated. And then our approach was to sort of take one project at a time and actually construct it. Patty, would you like to say anything? Sorry, just jumped right in here.
Well, when Julie and I started this 8 to 10 years ago, we really were unlikely partnership. You know, we really were kind of an odd couple. You had a prison warden that knew nothing about landscaping, and you had a college professor that knew nothing about prisons. So we really bonded and grown to be friends and taught each other so much over the last 8 to 10 years to end up where we are today from where we started 8 to 10 years ago is unbelievable. We've learned things, we would do things differently, and we'll share some of those with you today. But it really was an unlikely partnership that grew into a partnership that greatly changed and is a great benefit to the Iowa Department of Corrections and both prison facilities that use Julie and the Iowa State University.
Yeah, so this campus broke ground in 2010. We came in 2011, and it started out as a hypothetical project for students, just to kind of help think about where trees and shrubs and things might be placed. And then it just really grew somewhat organically into an actual, program and design, build, and education program for both students and incarcerated individuals. So I want to also share some of our struggles right off the bat. And this is just something to sort of think about as we also, talk about our successes. They say there's no such thing as bad press. Well, we got some, right? We had bad press. We had bad press right off the bat. The Iowa State put a press release out saying, hey, here's a cool project that students were able to do. They went in and they met incarcerated individuals, and they created some design ideas. And so they're proposing these butterfly spaces, and a local news station ran with the story, pitched it to Patty and I that it was going to be a positive story about this, sort of mutually beneficial opportunity for students to have a learning experience and incarcerated individuals to have a better, environment, a healthier environment. And then they found a local legislator who was really against the project and made it very public. And so I just included a little clip here of that media. We also got a fair bit of pushback from staff, correctional staff, the general public. And, people really thought this was a poor use of funds, even though, we scrounged the bottom of the barrel for a lot of our funding. Some of the funding did come from the construction project of the prison. So I included this picture because here we have a correctional officer, sergeant, who, Patty, we learned after the first project to bring somebody in from the staff and really teach them what we're doing. So when they're talking to other staff members in the hallway or in the parking lot or whatever, that they can say, you know what, you guys, I understand your concerns, or this is negative, but here are the benefits of this, right? And that if they can start to understand that this is more than just beautification, that there are really incredible benefits that those who are living here can receive, and the staff as well, that we felt like that was a really powerful move.
We really did change some minds. The senator that thought the prison was going to be too nice, it would be a Holiday Inn, and we shouldn't be spending money on things like that. We really, in fact, he came out to the prison and I gave him a tour, and after that he said he got it. So we did turn him around, and we really did learn that we had to approach people one-on-one. The officer sitting in this picture was a real naysayer about you shouldn't be doing all this kind of stuff. And within a few months, we had so many staff advising us on how to grow a garden, what we should grow. So we really got some of these people one by one to come across and see the benefits of this project. And they saw it work. They saw some of the women with better behavior. So when they start seeing success, then we started changing people's mind, but it didn't start out that way.
I spent a lot of time just talking to staff and hearing their stories about their prize-winning tomatoes and things like that, because they want to, share those stories. And I want them to realize that the benefits that they get from, going to the park or the beach or whatever on the weekend is the same thing that every human being deserves and needs. And that, unfortunately, the way that we have to bring that to people who are in prison looks a lot different than the way that they seek out those restorative benefits of nature. So this is I think a helicopter shot, right, Patty, of the first.
I think we had a drone. Oh no, it was a helicopter. Yeah.
This is the first project that we built. We called it the multi-purpose outdoor classroom because we got so much pushback and that first sort of media blitz that we had an amphitheater in the space. And so we started calling it an outdoor classroom, and nobody had a problem with that. Patty and I have talked about this. We sort of played to that a little bit, okay, fine. They don't like the word amphitheater. That sounds luxurious. We'll call it an outdoor classroom, which it is. That was the way that it was all set up was, these smaller spaces or smaller classrooms for, some of the teachers and counselors and stuff to bring their activities outside, like role playing activities and things like that. And then this bigger space was really scaled for things like graduation ceremonies. It's been used for memorial services and things like that. So it was that. And I think, I've told Patty, I've toughened up a lot over the years through this project. And I don't think that I would play to that anymore. I don't think that we need to make people feel better about an amphitheater being inside of a prison. I think we need to just be serious and say, that's what it is. It doesn't matter what you call it. The benefits are the benefits, and they're justifiable.
But it's a reality, perception was huge when we got this project started. So if they saw yoga and butterfly gardens and an amphitheater, and we ended up getting almost everything we wanted by renaming it, I guess at the time I was thinking about picking my battles and how to get it done with the least resistance. We were able to get it done.
Mhm. So I'll give a brief overview. Again, I know Naomi went through a lot of this on Saturday, so I'll just touch on it. But we really did ground everything that we did and all the decisions that we made in evidence-based design. And we were really thinking about grounded theories that support this idea that nature exposure on multiple levels is beneficial, both mentally and physically, for people. And so one of the theories that I love is the prospect refuge theory that Jay Appleton introduced. And the idea is essentially that you want to see everything around you, but not be seen. This is a rarity, as many of you know from your experience in a prison setting. This is a rarity. How often can a person who's incarcerated, and I know some of you who are listening today have lived experience, how often were you able to be in a space where you felt like you had some solitude, you were still safe, but you had some solitude, and you could see around you, right? You don't have to watch your back because you can see everything around you. So we really designed this space with that in mind. One of our key grounding theories is also the biophilia principle, which is the love of life and living things. So E.O. Wilson, Eric Fromm, I think maybe coined the term, and E.O. Wilson is the one who really gets a lot of credit for it. And just this idea that we really need to be connected with nature. The older I get and the more experience I have in a lot of settings, I realize that this disconnect that we have with the natural world is really a detriment to all species, human and non-human, that we really need to make these connections, and we need to make them often. We also grounded the outdoor classrooms specifically in the landscape preference theory, which is a Kaplan, and Ryan theory. And I jammed these 4 slides together, hoping I could save a little time. But the idea is that we were really thinking about the 4 principles within that theory, which are legibility, complexity, mystery, and coherence. But then, and I'll talk a little bit about some of these security compromises that we had to make because of security, in terms of, complexity in the landscape generally means you have a lot of layers in the vegetation, and there's variations in the topography. Well, we were able to do that, but we did have to make some compromises to be able to accommodate security concerns. Attention restoration theory. This is, I know Naomi talked about this, but the general idea is that we have a couple of different systems in our brains, and if you're trying to focus on something for a long period of time, or something is holding your attention, maybe stressful, a longer period of stress, it can cause mental fatigue, and the outdoor environment has been shown to reduce that mental fatigue. So this would be ideal, right? You pull all these theories together, therapeutic garden theories and landscape preference theories. This would be sort of an ideal environment. There's lots of layers to the landscape. There's lots of interest. There's mystery, right? You want to know what's around the corner of that walkway, right? You want to know what's happening in the shadows. There's things that are going to be moving. There'll be butterflies. The space is activated. But we have to compromise, right? If we're going to work in these facilities, we have to make some compromises, because at the end of the day, everybody needs to be safe and feel safe. I mentioned this the other day in conversation, but I really learned the most about security from working with the people who are incarcerated. The students would present their designs, and you'd have an individual who would say, that's not going to work. I won't feel safe in that space. And then they would talk about why they didn't feel safe in that space. And then we revisited the design. Patty, jump in here anywhere.
I will.
So I'll talk a little bit about how we balance some of these security concerns, and really try to achieve the the benefits of the theories that we were grounding our work in. So balancing, we balanced plants with security, right? So we didn't get to do all those layers immediately in one space, but we do have a tree canopy layer. It's still growing. And then primarily what we have in this facility are native prairie plants. And we do have a relationship with the Iowa Department of Natural Resources. These plants are harvested locally. They're grown out on site. And then the seeds are harvested and used in other prairie reconstruction projects throughout the state. And I also have found that the individuals who work on the crew who do the seed harvesting love this idea that the seed that they're holding in their hands, that they're harvesting. And I love this too, right? That you can hold this seed in your hand in the middle of a prison, and it's going to go out and be part of a park somewhere for somebody else to enjoy. There's something really deep and meaningful, I think, about that. And I'm glad to be able to sort of share those opportunities and also be able to teach about, the native landscapes and the degradation to our native landscapes. We had to balance hardscape and security. So this is all native Iowa limestone. I'll just be honest, we got this because I did a lot of talking and convincing, and we got some limestone from a quarry the limestone is weathered, and so they didn't really want to sell it. So we were able to get a lot of 17 semi-loads of limestone. So that was impressive, and also a lot of lifting. This was a really big project. And it's all told, this particular project is 1 acre site. But we did have to balance security. We didn't really have the means to make all of these masonry walls, which would probably enhance security in terms of, the wall pieces being able to be lifted up. But we did epoxy the top layer together, and those have held up really well. We've had to fix a few blocks here and there. And we weren't able to go as high with the vegetation as we wanted to. That was a compromise. So that when you couple together the wall, which is 18 inches at seat height, and then you want 18 inches to 2 feet of planting, the security director comes in and says, now you're at 4 feet, right? That's not safe. There's too many sightline issues. And so, we had to scale the plantings back down. Patty, I'll let you talk about this, but we certainly this is at the Iowa State Penitentiary. We made a lot of compromises here. And Patty chose a lot of battles to not pick.
So I was at Mitchellville for a number of years, and we started our landscaping project at Mitchellville, a women's prison. Their old facility had trees, so staff was used to trees, and it was kind of more open design than the maximum security prison that you're seeing in this picture. So I came here the last 2 years of my career, and Julie had already started working here, coming up with designs and using a lot of offenders' input into what they wanted down there. Now, attitudes are a little different between a men and a women's facility. The old Iowa State Penitentiary was an old facility. It was a walled facility. It was actually falling apart, so they built this new facility. So a lot of rigid attitudes. And quite frankly, some of the staff believed, and the city and the legislators, the politicians believed, that the inmates didn't deserve anything nice, quite frankly. So it was a whole lot of talking about how we were going to do this. One, getting staff to buy in on it, and two, how are we going to do it safely? Because the security concerns are different from a women's facility than a men's facility. So when we started talking about a waterfall in a men's maximum security prison, let me tell you, there was a whole lot of pushback from the community, from the staff, and quite frankly, the offenders didn't believe it was going to happen. They thought it was too nice and it would never be allowed to happen. So we did. I went out and I talked to a lot of Kiwanis groups, a lot of Rotary groups, to get their, to tell them why we were doing what we were doing. Iowa and the penitentiary is pretty strong union. So we had a lot of conversations with them about why we were doing this. I don't know if we made a lot of success in changing views, but we did make some. And finally, it got to the place that says, we're just going to start doing this. So we had to make some concessions. Julie can talk about the the building part of it, but I wanted some trees down here. I didn't get any trees down here. And Fort Madison, we did get
Yeah.
hundreds of trees in Mitchellville and no trees here. I compromised to small shrubs. I did get some lilac bushes, but they were afraid of people hiding things. They were afraid of the offenders hiding behind things and hiding weapons and hiding those kind of things, which are fair concerns because this happens in this population. But we did get it done. That pond does work. We did get some koi fish in there. So those were big successes. I wanted smells. A prison doesn't always smell great. So I wanted flowers that smelled like the lilacs and things like that. So we did get those things done. But big regret is I didn't get any trees. But down here, it was really small steps, baby steps on how we can get things done and get some buy-in. So we really didn't have any sabotage. So you can see it kind of looks funny. You see a beautiful waterfall and the sound is so relaxing. And then you have the razor wire up in the top. But it was a beautiful landscaping design. And then we wanted to do a vegetable garden. Why would anybody argue about a vegetable garden? I got pushed back on that. And the security director wanted to put, and inside a maximum security prison, he wanted to put the vegetable gardens inside a fence inside the maximum security prison. That's not what we did. So we were able to have a large vegetable garden. The guys were allowed to use some tools so they could do the work. Now I did have to compromise on tomato cages. If you've ever thought about tomato cages and could that be a security issue? Yeah, it could be a security issue. So we ended up moving the tomatoes outside the fence because we couldn't deal with the cage issues without it turning into a weapon.
These are not normal constraints that most landscape architects consider on a project. So some of these have been, really challenging, but also from a learning perspective, these have been good things for my students to think about as well, really considering these constraints.
And Julie and her students were good about calling us on things sometimes, because sometimes correctional people might be a little rigid or closed-minded. And the famous words that we always say, we've always done it this way. So Julie and the students called us on some of that stuff and said, okay, what's the deal with the rocks? Or what's the deal with 18 inches? Why is the magic 18 inches or 24 inches? So I think we both moved over the years and became less rigid. And Julie certainly knows now how to think like a security director.
And challenge the security director. Yeah, one of the first things that we called out was when we first went in and toured the facility and started talking to Patty and staff and incarcerated individuals, we learned that they couldn't be on the lawn. And I think maybe this was one of the first points where I realized that maybe Patty and I really could work together, even though we were coming at this from really, really different perspectives. And I just went to her and said, this is crazy. They can't be on the lawn.
They can't walk on the grass.
They can't walk on the grass. Couldn't sit on the grass. They had to be on hard surfaces only. And I said, this is just absolutely absurd and inhumane. Well, this is the way it's always been done. Well, not anymore.
Look
right?
at the picture.
So those were obstacles that we overcame. We took sort of logistic scientific approaches, but I'm not ashamed to say I also take a very emotional approach to a lot of this. And that's not always welcomed in prisons or in academia, but that's just the way I do things. And I just didn't feel like it was right to not allow people to be on the grass. Which now looking back really feels like a minor battle, all things considered. Okay, so trees, yeah, I was told that I couldn't plant trees in this prison either. So we started looking at really what were some of the concerns. Concerns are hiding behind it, climbing them. Certainly branches could be broken off and used as weapons. I say these things out loud now and I think, how ridiculous is it that we even have to consider this, right? We've never had any of those problems here. We chose to stick with trees that don't get a large girth, right? So you're looking at an aspen grove here. Downside is, for those of you who know trees, they can be a little finicky and they could be short-lived. but they were also quick growing. So they provided canopy pretty quickly in a space that was completely wide open, former construction site. And also they regenerate. So the hope is that even if they do sustain some damage, and they get carved into a lot, they sustain a little damage, they're pretty tough. So actual species selection became really important. I remember starting out thinking about non-toxic plants, and then, moving into like beyond non-toxic, what are the other ways that we can look at this and really start to bring a therapeutic landscape inside of a prison. So circulation this was a big compromise, and so one of the design iterations previous to this one was all these sinuous paths that sort of almost look like a tortoise shell design from the air, from the plan view. And that was something that the security staff that came to the presentations were like, no way, that's just way too complicated. We're not going to be able to see where people are at. This just becomes a huge sightline issue. And so we straighten the paths, and it's okay. I think the spaces they're nice. There's good vegetation. But I will say this is a miss, right? This is something that, if you're listening and you're wanting to build a space, this is a compromise I wouldn't make again. I don't know that I had a choice in the moment. I don't know that I had a choice that early on in our partnership. But this is an example of a really therapeutic space. This is the L's garden that David Camp and Amy Wagenfeld et al. Designed. And you can see these sinuous shapes are much more appealing, right? The theories hold true that these sinuous shapes, the more organic shapes are better. So I wouldn't go that way again. The most recent project that we built, this was the one I wanted to do over and over, and I kept getting no, big fat no. So this is a children's garden or visiting garden. And this was the project that I wanted to do from the beginning, because I was really interested in what this relationship looks like between particularly mothers and their children, but anybody and their visitors. And what is this experience like for kids who come into this space? But we had to balance a lot of security issues here, because and the reason I got told no every year we sat down to decide what the next project was to build. And I was told no because the security staff would just say, no way, we just can't do this. This is where the public interfaces inside of the prison, right? They'll be physically in the prison. And they are. We did put a wooden fence around this, but another compromise I had to make here is, if you guys are familiar with playgrounds, there are play surfaces, which are really, really expensive. The sort of pour in place rubber. The other alternative is mulch that's at least 12 inches deep. And this is for fall reasons, right? This is to create a fall zone. And I couldn't do either of those in this facility. And so the compromise was these really sad looking mats, black mats. But this is a picture of it several weeks later, and so you can see the grass actually grows up through it. It does help with some of the mud and traffic issues that the staff and a number of the incarcerated individuals who do some of the cleaning were concerned about the mud being tracked in. So that was a compromise. And it's okay. At least I can sleep at night knowing if a child falls off of here, that, there's a rubberized mat that's going to help protect them from that fall. But that was a security compromise, right? There was concern about that. Hattie already mentioned tomato cages. So security, the union actually came in one day and they had filed a grievance against me and my tomato cages. Right? And I was like, why is this on me? It's the whole crew, right? It's the security director had approved them. I didn't just go in and put them in, but it's okay. That's all right. So it opened up an opportunity for a lot of conversations, hey, did you know tomatoes are actually vines and not freestanding plants? They need support. So we had to make some compromises, and we did have to move. The plants that needed support, we did have to move them into a less open area, you know, a place that wasn't as open to all the general population. So there wasn't so much of a concern. But I will say that the individuals on the crew, both the students and those who were incarcerated, were like, oh my gosh, this is just ridiculous, right? This is really should not be our concern. Our concern is like, can we get all this stuff watered today? So,
You know, and again, it's the naysayers that aren't supportive of this project find ways to make it fail. So they saw those tomato cages, which from my point of view, from the warden, yes, it could be a weapon. I think any of us can find weapons through prisons, but you know, we have to make compromises. We have to ensure we're doing this the safest way possible. I think we found some bamboo sticks at one time to use as tomato cages too, to secure them up there. And then it just got to be it wasn't worth it. And we moved them outside the secure perimeter and we still had tomatoes.
Definitely had to balance tools with safety and security. We did lose a trowel one day and it shut the prison down for a while. That was a little scary. Not scary in terms of, you know, I wasn't concerned about really anything happening with the tool other than just, I knew everybody was really disappointed that they had to go inside on a nice day until we found that tool. And so, you know, we had to balance those kinds of things. I also, you know, I've got, even if we weren't working inside of a prison, if I'm working on a design build project with students and, you know, and I've got somebody's entrusted their child to go to college and have a safe and meaningful experience, and they're using power tools and they get hurt, you know, that's a lot of responsibility. So even from that perspective, balancing the use of big chop saws and skid loaders and heavy equipment, you know, there was a lot to consider there as well. So we had tool checks, daily tool checks. We just had to keep track of them. It really was, for the most part, never really a big issue. I don't know, Patty, if you have anything to add to that.
Well, tool checks also take time.
They do.
So if you have 20 shovels and 20 rakes, and you have to count every one of those going in, going out, usually at lunchtime, because that's count time. So we tried to keep everything down to the minimal number possible, just to aid in the routines of the day, make it easier to count, make it easier on staff to do their job, and lessen the chances of somebody getting hurt or something disappearing.
Yeah. Matt, how are we doing on time? We good?
Yeah, we're still good. It looks like actually perfect timing, about 10 minutes until we probably want to open it up for Q&A.
Yeah, so I also wanted to just share that, well, I'll preface this by saying, so I work in academia, but I'm a really applied academic. I really like to be in the field. I really like to be in communities. I really have always been a little uncomfortable with reducing people to numbers. And so I struggled early on in this process to produce the sort of academic research that was expected of me in my work world. Until I started to realize also that we do need to understand what the benefits really look like for people. Like, how are people really experiencing these spaces that we're creating, and how are they perceiving the process, or how are they feeling about the process that we're going through? So we did a preliminary study of the outdoor classroom. I can't remember what year we did that. And when I say we, this study was done by Dr. Barb Taves and Dr. Amy Wagenfeld and I. And so you can see some of the numbers here. I mean, I think all things considered, basically what we can deduce from this is that people are really using the space. They're not using it the way that I had anticipated, right? The way that the way the students had designed this based on their focus group sessions, this isn't being used. This is referred to as the yard. Almost nobody calls it the outdoor classrooms. They just call it the yard, because it's the biggest open space, gathering space that they're allowed to be in sun up to sundown. And so we had set out focusing this space on really bringing indoor classroom activities outside, and counseling sessions and those types of activities that would typically be done inside that could be stressful and really, lead to that mental fatigue, the idea was that we bring them outside. And, I'll speak just a little bit to the process here by way of the findings. The other study that we did more recently was of the visitor's garden or the children's garden. And I'll tell you a little bit about the findings, and then I want to talk a little bit about the process. And Patty, I'll let you do some wrap up, and we'll take questions. So you can see in this study that the people who are using the space. So this was mixed methods. We did some surveys, but we also did interviews. And so we did these walking interviews where we just went out and spent time in the garden with people and talked to them about how they felt about it. And then we also had kids drawing pictures of their favorite spaces. And those were really, really fun. So this is a space that's loved, it's used, it's creating, the impacts I think are really interesting in terms of, that it's, what we found is that it is creating a more child-friendly space, a more family-friendly space. It is creating an experience that people want to come back to. It's less intimidating. It is improving that parent-child relationship based on the responses that we saw. And the one that was most intriguing to me is that it was creating a home-like environment. So a lot of the responses that we got were, this feels like a backyard or a community park. And when I'm in this space with my child or my friend or my aunt or whomever, I don't feel like an incarcerated person. I can put on that identity. I can take that, shed that identity, and I can put the identity on of mom or sister or whatever I am when I'm not here. And I would love to dig deeper into that and just really understand more about it, because, and I will tell you that the design process, and I don't know, how many design oriented people we have listening here, but the design process changed so much over the years based on what we learned and the trust that we built inside the facility and our ability to really engage. I was told early on, don't form relationships with people who are incarcerated, don't have private or personal conversations. There's limits to all of that, but also over the course of 8 or 9 years, I got to know people. And so what we did differently from the first project to the last, and there was a progression in between. The first project, we did focus groups and we asked people what they wanted, and we designed what they wanted based on what we heard. And we tested our designs, we got feedback, we made changes to that, and then we built it. And people love it, but it's not what we thought it was going to be, right? It's not exactly lining up with those initial goals. This project, on the other hand, we handed the pencil to the people who live here, right? The people who are actually going to use the space. We said, here are some maps, here are scaled models, here's some materials. Let's talk about, what do you really want to do here? And the pivotal moment was when an individual said, do you know there's some women in here who have been here long enough that their kids have reached the age where they can ride a bike and they didn't get to teach them that? Can we make a space where they can teach their child how to ride a bike or push a baby in a stroller? And then the garden ended up 6 times bigger than what we had anticipated, but that was okay because the purpose was so important, and it didn't come from us. It came from those who are incarcerated in this facility.
And an interesting fact about the bicycle riding, the men at the Iowa State Penitentiary refurbished bicycles. So they got some broken down ones from the police departments and stuff. They fix them up, and then we actually donated them to the women's prison in Mitchellville. So it was kind of cool that the guys donated some bikes so the women could teach their kids to ride bikes at Mitchellville.
Okay.
When Julie and I started this project, we had no idea what we were getting into. Absolutely no idea. I remember asking her for a rose bushes and a magnolia tree. That's my idea of landscaping. We had no idea it was going to turn into what it turned into, and some of those beautiful areas that you saw. But as a prison warden, I know the women have to feel safe and be in a positive environment to make the changes they need to make. Most of the women at Mitchellville are going to get out. 95% are going to get out. They have to look at some of the issues, whether it was domestic, whether it was drugs or alcohol or anger, whatever it was, they have to look at those issues so they can make the changes. They're not going to do that if they don't feel safe. We have a lot of prisons that safety is an issue. So I think we were very successful in making a more positive, and I'm not embarrassed to say it is pretty for a prison or a positive environment. So these women can make the changes and feel safe and make the changes they need to make. At Fort Madison, a maximum security prison, much different. But I think we did make some steps, small steps in that environment. They would tell you huge steps because you have a waterfall in a maximum security prison. But it's really baby steps, and it is compromising in order to get things done, and a lot of educating. You know, the staff may not care about the theory, but when you explain to them why they like to get their hands dirty and grow vegetables at night when they get off work, or they have vacations going fishing or hunting or going to the beach, then they understand the theories behind what Julie's talking about. And if it works for them, it's going to work for the women and the men at the penitentiary and at the women's facility. Huge success. It really did start off as an odd couple. But I think what we accomplished over the 8 to 10 years, I don't think you'd find a lot of pushback now. People have had time to see that it works. When we get naysayers, we talk about successes, and they get a little quieter when they're doing their negativity. Some politicians will still go out in the news and say they don't agree with it, but one-on-one private conversations, they have a different attitude about it. So that's important too.
Okay, we're happy to take questions.
Yeah, it looks like we have a couple in the comments here.
Yeah.
One from Richard.
Yep.
And a
Lack
couple
of outdoor
others.
space. Yeah. So, you know, I've thought a bit about this, and, you know, that we really have a lot, you know, we're in the middle of the Midwest. We have a lot of space, right? We've got a lot of horizontal plane, which you're not going to find obviously in your denser urban spaces. Oh boy. So what's our biggest challenge?
We were also lucky that we were going from the old prison to the new prison. So we had some space. It's just, what are we going to do with the space? And we didn't have a lot of flat space either. We had hilly space inside the women's facility. At the men's facility, it was pretty flat.
Well, you know, I guess I would say the biggest challenge is the establishing a long-term program and commitment. And that, I guess, you know, that's something we didn't really talk about here, Patty, but before Patty moved back to ISP and then retired, she had established a position. So there was a garden sergeant, and that position is intended to help, you know, create consistency. And I think, Patty, if I remember right, you made that a correctional staff position instead of like a trades position, right? Because there was less pushback for having correctional staff versus other staff. Is that right?
Yeah.
So that was one way to do that.
Pushback. But still, it's the perception, you know, it is an important position. We needed consistency, and security is a big issue. And people view a correctional officer or a correctional sergeant as more security conscious than maybe somebody that works in maintenance.
Mm-hmm.
And it worked.
Yeah, although I have thought about this a fair bit too. I'm not correctional staff, and I worked with hundreds and hundreds of women over the course of 8 years. And, you know, you can probably tell by the scale of some of these projects that I think I spent 4 or 5 entire summers, you know, in between semesters inside the facility. It's a lot of times a lot more than 40 hours a week. I never had any problems. There was never a single security concern other than a woman getting a rock, you know, thrown out of a lawnmower and having an injury, which was not a security concern, you know, but I never had any problems. So that begs a question about really, you know, Patty and I may differ on our opinion here, but it just begs a question about really what that security concern really is and how it can be met maybe differently.
We
So
compromised a lot over the years.
what's that?
We compromised a lot over
Oh,
the
yeah.
years. And it really is good being, getting pushback about, there's rocks everywhere. Why can't we use rocks for the walking path or something like that? And before I run out of time, I really want to hit on the fact that one of the biggest things that I never realized when we started this project was the impact on the students. We knew they'd be getting, and that's why we did the first news release that we did. We thought it would be a positive story. These college students getting hands-on experience going to the prison to do this work, and the prison, a state institution, got some valuable product out of it. So we never dreamed it would turn into something negative. But hearing these students talk over the years and seeing them talk to the offenders over the years, one-on-one, their views changed of what incarcerated individuals were like. College students don't care, think, or know anything about prisons unless they watch Orange is the New Black or they see something on TV. They just don't think about those things. But bringing them into the institution and hearing them talk to these women and to the guys at Fort Madison one-on-one, you could see the light bulb go off, and they thought, these people are just like me. Yes, they are just like you that made mistakes. So in the future, there's no doubt in my mind, these students, as they progress through their careers and they see applications in front of them of somebody that's maybe been incarcerated, instead of just throwing it away and not giving it a second look, there's no doubt in my mind that they will give interviews, and if they don't qualify or don't meet the requirements for the job, that's one thing, but not to give them the job just because of that reputation they have of being a formerly incarcerated individual. Huge impact on how their social views changed because of these projects. And some of them got jobs based on putting this project on their resume. It's pretty interesting. It's pretty unusual, unique opportunity.
You know, what's funny about that is, yeah, I think, that, and I know I saw Daniel earlier, but I don't know if Daniel Winterbottom's on here, but he also runs a lot of design build programs at various settings. And we have found that students who have that hands-on experience really do have a really good, sort of leg up in terms of, hireability. But what I have found over the years is the students who participated in this project at ICIW, inevitably they come back to me a couple of years after being out in practice and they say, I hate my job. I don't want to work in a design firm. I don't want to design privileged spaces anymore. I want to design the spaces that nobody else is paying attention to. How do I do that? Where do I do that? Why don't you start a nonprofit so we can all go work for your nonprofit? Right? Why do we continue to train students to work in privileged spaces? I think there's, now I'm taking this on a little bit of a different tangent than maybe the focus of this conference, but I do think that one thing I would do differently is I would make sure that we had a greater connection outside of the prison, into communities, into the home environments that people where, you have high populations of people who are incarcerated in concentrated spaces, and really think about how design and planning fields have affected people in their communities. And yeah, that would be a different focus, but I think an important one.
Great opportunity for the students. I still stay in touch with some of them, and several of them have asked me for letters of references over the years, and I've given it to them, and they laugh and said they're the only ones that had a reference from a prison warden when they went in for their job interviews. So, fun thing to say.
So yeah, so back to, I think it was Rick's question, Richard, about challenges. I think the biggest thing is establishing that longevity. How do you make a program that sticks? And I heard some of the speakers and, earlier last week talking about, making these programs self-sustaining, like having them, where they can generate their own profits to continue to support the program. And, I think that's actually a good conversation for all of us to be having is, I suspect that's a challenge for a lot of projects and programs, is making them sustainable.
The guys at Fort Madison took such pride in their garden. I have never seen a garden with not one weed in it. And it was acres. It was huge, not one weed. They got to eat fresh vegetables, and we even planted strawberries. It's not something they get very often in a prison diet. So great pride they take in having those kind of jobs.
Other questions? Everybody's welcome to unmute and just talk to us too.
Everyone's being shy.
It does look like we have what should be a quick question in the chat from Kristen Powers. She's asking if there are any good research beyond your own that you refer to with regards to proving the impact of this type of work.
Mm-hmm. So you're trying to prove, I see your question now, prove impact. Let me think about that. And if you want, I'll put my email into the chat and you can connect with me if you want to talk about it. This does become a problem because one of the ways that we sustain this work is writing grants. And depending on the nature of the grant and the granting organization, they really do want to see that evidence and they want to see it up front, you know, and I found myself sort of screaming in my head saying, don't you see how valuable this is? Why do I have to continue to prove this in numbers over and over and over again, right? Can't you just like search in your heart and know this is important? That's just not the way that it works, right? So we do need to build up a bigger evidence base, but we, you know, that may be something, you know, for those of you who are organizing this to think about how we maybe do that in a more collective fashion too. I will say we did develop a couple of methods, and one method that was really cool that I would love to test out a little bit further was we had created these emoji cards. I can share how we did that too, but we created these cards. It was like a half card, and on the front was, before you have contact with nature or you go to the garden or whatever, you respond to how you're feeling. It's just like a scale, basically. There were a couple of questions, but it, you know, we had tested that, we piloted this in the mental health units, in the acute and subacute units, because we had built a special garden for that population, which was really protected and secluded, well, semi-secluded. Anyway, so that you know, people would respond before they went out on one side, and then they came back in and they would respond again. And we didn't get a large number of responses. We didn't run that probably long enough, but I think that, you know, those kinds of potentially sweet little studies, I think could hold a lot of value, and people like to respond to things with emojis on them.
And I think there's one more, I do want to be conscious of time. We have a few minutes left, but I think there's one more question here. Might be a good one to end on in the chat on if you teach incarcerated individuals or participants the principles of design and planning. So how's that design process get integrated or kind of done with, and if they get certificate or college credits related to that?
William, this is a great question. Yeah, to some degree, you know, I always wanted to do more of that, and we're not working real actively in the prisons right now. We did develop a curriculum for the vegetable production gardens, and so we had put a fair bit of time into developing that curriculum, and then we were starting to develop some of the design curriculum. Yeah, we brought in on the last project, that's the one I would be most interested to maybe talk about or replicate in terms of the process and teaching those principles. So the answer is yes and no. I didn't do formal lectures, you know, and I didn't set it up like a course, but there was a lot of teaching. You know, it took us weeks and weeks to get through the design process, and all of that time was spent really inside of the prison with tracing paper, and, you know, so they were really the individuals who were on the design team. They were designers just like the students were. So anything I was teaching the students, I was teaching them at the same time. I could have done better.
Great. All right. So thank you again to Julie and Patty and all of our presenters today. And so for those of you, I recognize many faces. It's been great to see many of you who have been on with us since Thursday, and we do continue next Tuesday. We'll have the continuation of the conference starting at 3 p.m. Eastern time. And Tuesday next week is really going to be focused quite a bit, just about all on gardens, agriculture, and food justice throughout both of the presentations. So we hope you'll join us then. And as Matt is putting in the chat, if you are interested in getting in touch with other participants, we have a conference networking form, and you can put your name there and contact other participants through that. But other than that, we thank again the presenters and everyone who has joined us again for the continuation of this. And we hope to see you here with us next week. So thank you and take care, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, Matt and Anne and everybody for putting this together. It was really great.
Yes, Julie, Patty, thank you both so much for joining us.